Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a true-life story that is so wildly cinematic, you'd honestly be forgiven for thinking it was cooked up in a Hollywood writer's room. We're talking about Julie d'Aubigny, a historical figure who completely shattered every single convention of her era. So get ready, because we're going on a really fast-paced journey through a history-making life that was lived totally, unapologetically off the script.
To really understand the kind of person we're dealing with here, just picture this scene. It's Paris, 1695. A lavish masked ball is in full swing. Our protagonist, who happens to be this dazzling performer with a breathtaking soprano voice and, well, a pretty fiery temper, spots a haughty young nobleman insulting some of the women there. Now, she doesn't just politely ask for an apology. Oh no, she steps right up, pulls him outside into the courtyard, draws a blade, and soundly defeats him in a duel. She even takes a keepsake from him as a trophy, before just casually walking away.
Okay, let's dive into this and clearly define exactly who we're talking about here. Maupin, born Julie d'Aubigny, was a 17th century French sword fighter and opera star. She lived life entirely on her own terms, fiercely defying the incredibly strict social conventions of 17th century France. And you know that courtyard duel we just talked about? Yeah, that is literally just a tiny footnote in a life that reads exactly like an action-adventure movie.
Act 1. Origins and Rebellion. You see, long before she was gracing the high society stages of the Paris Opera, young Julie was already a master of the rapier. She didn't just pick this up as a hobby, she was actually taught by her father, who happened to be a professional fencing instructor. But, as you can probably imagine, for a young woman in the 1600s, cultivating this kind of fierce, combative spirit was not something society or even her own traditional family was prepared to handle. Frustrated by her rebellious streak, her parents shipped her off to a convent. The idea was that this strict, quiet, monastic environment would finally curb her spirit. But wow, did that plan spectacularly backfire. Instead of quiet contemplation, Julie immediately fell head over heels in love with a fellow novice. Now, a secret romance in a 17th century convent, that's pretty hard to hide for long. The convent superiors inevitably found out what was going on, and their response was incredibly strict and swift. They separated the two lovers and locked Julie away in total isolation. But here's the thing about Julie. She absolutely refused to be contained. She wasn't just going to sit there, accept her punishment, and repent. Nope. She immediately started plotting a massive retaliation. And that brings us to an escape plan that is just staggering in its macabre audacity, literally jaw-dropping. First, she sneaked into the convent's infirmary and retrieved the body of a recently deceased nun. Next, she dragged that corpse all the way back into her own monastic cell, placed it in her bed, and locked her cell door from the inside. Finally, she set fire to the room to completely cover her tracks. By the time the flames engulfed the building, Julie was long gone. She actually faked her own death just so she could escape and run away with her lover. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. Act 2. The Untouchable Outlaw.
So, after eventually parting ways with that lover, Julie definitely did not go into quiet hiding. Instead, she traveled across France, making a living right out in the open. She performed street songs and fearlessly showcased those formidable fencing skills she'd learned from her dad, basically living this wildly vibrant life on the run. But during one of her stops in a new town, she faced a brutal hazing. A group of arrogant young noblemen spotted her, assuming that the fierce reputation of this traveling performer was just, theatrical talk. They decided they were going to haze and humiliate her for entertainment. They really thought it'd be a simple bit of sport to put her in her place.
The absolutely crucial point here is the sheer scale of this challenge. 5. Not 1, not 2, but 5 men stepped up and challenged her to duels, one right after the other. It was a totally disproportionate challenge, clearly designed to physically exhaust her, overwhelm her, and publicly shame her.
And this brilliantly illustrates the disconnect here. Those noblemen fully expected to just wear her down through sheer numbers, but man, did they severely underestimate her. Julie simply drew her blade, took them on consecutively, and defeated all 5 men. She wounded every single one of them before walking away from the entire encounter completely unharmed. Unbelievable.
Now, we have to look at the historical context here. Under King Louis XIV, dueling was strictly illegal. So, as impartial observers of history, we see the inevitable consequence of her actions. Because she engaged in these outlaw duels, even though, let's be fair, she was completely provoked, she was forced to flee the city under the cover of night. This spectacular, cinematic feat permanently cemented her status as an untouchable outlaw, constantly on the run from the king's law.
Act 3. The Stage and Legacy. All right, we're shifting gears now. We're moving from the dusty roads of a wanted criminal to the glittering, highly cultured heights of celebrated artistry. Because eventually, Julie actually made her way to the absolute epicenter of French culture, the Paris Opera. And looking at it, Julie's life is just this brilliant contradiction. On one hand, you have a rap sheet featuring arson, illegal dueling, and cross-dressing, which, by the way, was another serious legal offense at the time. But on the other hand, she possessed this incredible resume, an overnight superstar, a powerful soprano, and a performer who is fiercely protected by actual royalty. Her raw, undeniable talent and her commanding stage presence were so profound that they actually shielded her from a turbulent criminal record that would have undoubtedly 100% ruined anyone else.
So what does this all mean? What should you really take away from this? Well, while we can impartially view her historical crimes, like the arson and the illegal duels, strictly for what they were under the law, the historical fact remains that both everyday audiences and royalty absolutely adored her. Why? Because she lived entirely on her own terms. She unapologetically broke almost every single rule society tried to impose on her, and in doing so, she achieved a level of freedom and fame that was basically completely unheard of for a woman of her time.
Which leaves us with this final thought. We've just explored a 17th century rebel's absolute, unshakable refusal to be boxed in by her society's expectations. She literally drew her own map. So, take a second to reflect on your own life. What rules are you letting hold you back? Thank you so much for joining this explainer. I really hope Julie Daubny's extraordinary story inspires you to live just a little bit more boldly and authentically today.